the reason why we're talking about this show is I wish that kids shows nowadays took the time and effort to do such quality work. It is just a kids show, but I think people are like, oh, it's a kids show, that means we don't have to put any effort into it.
Yeah.
No, I think you should put in twice the effort to it, because kids are going to watch this and they're going to, remember this into their adulthood. Look at us. We're, late 20s, early 30s. We're
Right.
still talking about the shows we watched as kids and the impact that they had on us.
The legacy of Wishbone does carry, like, even in my opinion, more so than most Disney movies, because, I mean, don't get me wrong. I really like the late 80s and early 90s era, or early to mid 90s era of Disney. But you like I was talking about earlier, it's like Wishbone, it did just open up your imagination and your mind to stories that were pretty, they had real elements to them. I mean, regardless of whether they took place in a fantastical land or if they were like, ancient or whatever, it's like you could understand what the universal truths of that story were.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. As always, this is Warrior Woman 91 and you are watching You Got It. So, being the very serious, high-minded person that I am, and that Mr. Donovan Fowler also is, we are going to be talking about Wishbone, the children's TV show today. So, Donovan, thank you so much for coming back on the show to talk about these ridiculous topics with me. I feel like you're the most qualified person that I could find to come on and talk about this subject. So thank you again for coming on.
Yes, to talk about Wishbone, I am very well read and well watched when it comes to Wishbone. Maybe not so much well read, but I think I watched most, if not all, of the episodes growing up. Although I did go to the Wikipedia page recently and I looked at the full list of episodes. And if it weren't for the descriptions of like what was going on in Wishbone's like real life, I would not have remembered any of the books that they covered. I mean, I would have remembered the ones that were my favorite, but like I saw Henry IV was on there. I was like, wow, they did Henry IV. Like, I don't remember that. Anyways, so that was a humorous sort of touching base with Wishbone, as it were.
Yeah. It is a little bit of a rabbit trail to go down, like, because you're kind of getting into your childhood headspace when you're looking at that list. You're like, oh wow, yeah, that was like the thing that it was so cool, and I just was so excited about that one, or that one was just like this, or whatever. Yeah. So it was a fun like trip down memory lane to go down that list of favorite Wishbone episodes. But before we talk about like which ones were the classics. My first question for you really is why do you think it's so important for kids to be well versed in classic literature?
Oh boy, this all of a sudden turned into the after school special. All right. Well, Kelly, I will say, as Betsy DeVos once said to me, no, I have no friendship with Betsy DeVos, so don't get political. Whatever that brought up in your audience, please just leave it. No, I would say when it comes to literature with kids, I mean, I think there is a sense of what is a classical education. Like, people have heard what that, the word thrown around or the term thrown around, but I used to hear it and I used to use it a lot, like that. Classical education, like I want a classical education, and I never really understood what that meant. And having encountered a lot of literature and entertainment in the postmodern, and I guess the modern and postmodern sphere, I think it's just good to get engaged with classic stories because let's just face it, they're entertaining. I mean, we were talking about how much we hated math at the beginning of this. During math class, I used to sit in the back of the room next to the bookshelf, and I would sneak books off of the bookshelf. And I would read Count of Monte Cristo. I'd read, just Dracula. I mean, just all these sort of like thrilling books. And granted, they were probably somewhat abridged for children, but it was a great entry point to storytelling. And anyways, as a storyteller, as somebody who spent most of his adult life studying storytelling, one thing that I've understood is that there's so much of our human so much of our human experience has been transferred into those stories of the past, and even the fictional ones. And when you look at the best of the best, like we're talking like classic literature, there's a lot that can be gleaned from it, and applied to your own life, despite all the time that's passed. There's just universality to it. So anyways, like even I was thinking about kind of my Christo today, and how anybody who's ever been wronged in their life, which, I mean, everybody's had like a betrayal of some sort. It may not be the most dramatic, you may not have gone to prison, but people can relate to that story. And it teaches you something about how to deal with that. So that's like a micro example, but that's what I'd say.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's super important for kids to have a grasp on classic literature, especially because it feels like it's something that, at least in public schools, it's just not really being looked at in the same way. Or like a lot of these books that I found that were, the stories were retold in Wishbone, I would never have heard of through my own schooling. And I homeschooled, and I feel like I had a good, K through 8 education, and then I went to high school and it was all down the drain. But it's kind of like Wishbone was an entry point for me to be exposed to all these classic stories that I would have otherwise never heard of. And, it does, as you say, open a door into kind of a better understanding of the human experience. So that's why Wishbone is a great show for kids. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Which are the best Wishbone episodes? And I have to confess right now, I paled at my list when I was writing it, because I was like, okay, I was going to narrow it down to 5, right? Because we're trying to keep it short. So I narrowed it down to 5, and then I have a secondary 5, and then I have a tertiary 5, and then I have one extra one at the bottom.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat. I definitely looked down the list, and like I said, some of them I couldn't quite remember, so those obviously disqualified. Like I said, I remembered the live action like Neighborhood Story, but not necessarily the book. But one interesting thing, just to tag on to what you were saying earlier about the classics, is and how Wishbone approached them. I was reading the Wikipedia article because I'm very well read and very, very learned. And and they used a word on there to describe, apparently, critics. This word, I had never encountered it before, and I had to look it up. But it said the show garnered particular praise for refusing to Bowdlerize many of the sadder or more unpleasant aspects of the source works. So Bowdlerizing, as I had to dive further into Wikipedia to figure out what that word meant, is censoring unpleasant or, things that are unpleasant to audiences. And it's true. I mean, as we will go through this list, that is one theme that I find throughout the Wishbone stories, is that it doesn't cut out the things that are maybe considered unpleasant or tragic in the hopes that people will learn from what the morals of the stories are. So.
And I think that's one of the things that I loved about the show as a kid, just because it was thrilling. That like I would be legitimately scared of some of the stories, but I would still watch them over and over again, even if I'm scared of that one, I'm gonna watch it because it was really creepy. So like I love just the adventure part of it as a kid was what kind of both drew me in and kept me watching it. And then looking back on it on these stories as an adult, now I'm actually buying these books and reading them in full because I gotta have my whole classic like selection at my house, right?
Oh yeah.
So I've been reading these as an adult and like re-experiencing them and learning new things through adult eyes, because things that I didn't pick up on as a kid because I just didn't understand the world or didn't understand how things worked, or even just like just concepts that are foreign to children that kind of go over their heads. Now I'm seeing it as an adult and I'm like, oh, that's what that meant. Oh, that's what that meant, Well,
and the fact that they condensed it into 30 minutes with with an accompanying parallel storyline is
Yeah.
pretty amazing. I mean, I just have a lot of respect. I have a lot of respect for the makers of Wishbone, partly due to the fact that they weren't even in Hollywood. They were like in Texas. And they were just, even though it's a silly show about a dog dressed up in costumes, I mean, it's very well done. It's just funny. I mean, it's lightning isn't going to strike that little dog twice, as they say. Thank God. Thank goodness.
Rest in peace, the little dog that played Wishbone. I think his name was Soccer.
Soccer amazed the world.
He was a good dog. So he was the ultimate good dog. So I guess I'm just gonna get started. I'm just gonna rattle off my top 5 and not really say anything about them. Okay. Just to give you kind of an idea of where my Wishbone tastes come from. But my favorite episodes are The Legend of Creepy Callers is the episode name, but it was the Sleepy Hollow Wishbone episode, I think, is the all-time best one. I really loved as a kid A Tale of Two Cities, Joan of Arc, the Tom Sawyer episode, and then Journey to the Center of the Earth. For some reason, I just absolutely obsessed over that episode. So those would be like my top 5.
Yeah,
like the top 5 of the top 5 of the top 5. If that makes sense.
So maybe we'll segment this into the top 5, and then we'll go into our backup 5.
Yeah.
Does that sound? Yeah. It's funny when you mentioned Journey to the Center of the Earth. I think I remembered that's the one where Wishbone kind of talks like this, like he's got like little glasses, and like he really affected his voice to be like this weird little German scientist or some Austrian.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a good one. That one was scary because they had that massive snake. It was like, it wasn't a snake. It was like some sort of weird mythological or prehistoric, like Placidon or something at the center of the earth. And they showed it like once or twice, and it was pretty scary. Like you were almost, but your interest was piqued. You wanted to go in there and see what it was.
That's another thing that's great about these TV shows with limited budgets. They can't show you very much.
Yes.
And so that actually ends up scaring me more when I can't see something, but I know it's there, and then my imagination fills in the blank, and then I'm like sitting there more scared of that than I am of the goriest movie that you can come up with.
No, absolutely. I mean, just to, I guess I'll go ahead and go through my list, and we can kind of compare the two. I would say my top 5 naturally. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can't count. And I think I may have mixed some of these together. So bear with me. But I would say, okay, so number 1 on my list is Tale of Two Cities. Yeah. Because I love that book. And that actually was the first introduction I ever had to the source material. And the actor who played Sidney Carton he was very good. He was very good. And there was also some scary stuff in that. Like that was one of the like accompanying things, other than my mother telling me about it, but like how scary the French Revolution really would have been, the reign of terror. Like they really didn't hold back and like showing or implying a lot of the violence that happened there. Yeah. Next up, Treasure Island was a favorite of mine. I really love that one and then the accompanying with the barn and the horseshoe. Like that was good. Tom Sawyer was great. Red Badge of Courage. I remember I got a VHS of that one, and I would watch it over and over again. And that one, I remember being shocked by the themes, like the anti-war themes, which were very poignant. And then I would say, so wait, we've got Tom Sawyer, we got Treasure Island, Tale of Two Cities, Red Baggage. Okay, so I got one more. So I'd say the last is The Hound of the Baskervilles. That one scared me. Like that one was really creepy. Yeah. And like to your point with the 5 that you mentioned before, I mean, that was one thing that the Wishbone and what we were talking before with them being well made, they were really good at setting tones. Like in the Tom Sawyer episode, you had that guy who was like digging up the wasn't he digging up like the unknown grave or something?
Yeah.
And like you were like afraid of him at first, and then the kids are like investigating, and it's kind of scary. And like in the actual story of Tom Sawyer, Crazy Joe is scary and like all this stuff. But then it ends on a really poignant like note when you actually learn his full story. And I think it's like an ancestor of his that he's like come to finally like lay to rest wherever there. I don't remember how the full story, but it was just, there was always kind of a nice, wholesome, poignant ending to the episodes.
There's a scene in that Tom Sawyer episode where it's Tom and his girlfriend are stuck in the cave and they run into Crazy Joe in the cave.
Yeah.
That freaked me out so bad.
And there's twine. He has like some twine that he uses to mark like the way that they took. Yeah. And Crazy Joe, I think in the book, here's one of the things that kind of cracked me up was I actually thought that there was the Huckleberry Finn accompanying episode. I could have sworn that there was one with Huckleberry, like that Huckleberry Finn had his own episode in the Wishbone series. But then I realized that in Tom Sawyer they had to change Injun Joe, like Injun, like Injun Joe's name to Crazy Joe because it was politically incorrect. And I was like, oh boy, I don't even want to know what they would have to do with Huckleberry Finn, given all the controversy around that. So I was like, there's definitely not a Huckleberry Finn episode. But no, that Tom Sawyer episode was a great adventure. Exactly. That's a great point. Yeah.
They only had 2 episodes that were like the 2-parter episodes, and that was one of them. I think that was actually the very first episode. That Tom Sawyer episode was the very first episode that they did. And the
Sleepy Hollow episode. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't remember the Tom Sawyer episode being a 2-parter, but I believe it.
Yeah, that one was that was the first 2-parter of the show that I ever saw, and my brother and I, like, we always, because people need to understand, but this is before streaming. This is before any of that. We're watching these
all you Zoomers
shows.
out there.
Yeah. We're watching these shows at 3:30 every weekday, and we don't get part 2 until tomorrow at 3:30. And if we miss tomorrow at 3:30, then we miss tomorrow at 3:30, and we will never find out what happened. So that's what people need to understand. So my brother and I, when there was a 2-parter, it was an event in our house because we had to make sure we were going to see that next part the next day.
And if it happens that you one day in 2001, you're watching the first part of a 2-parter of Wishbone, and the next day you tune in at the exact same time and you find Sagwa, the Chinese cat. It's just, sorry, that's just the way it goes. The cats took over.
I think that show was the show that ended up taking the slot for Wishbone.
It did, yeah. It replaced Wishbone.
Yes.
Yeah.
I watched that show too. Okay.
Sagwa was.
It was cute.
It did not compel me. I was like.
No. I was. It's another one of those instances where I was definitely too old for that show by the time it started coming out. But I was like, it's cute. My little sister can watch it.
Was Dragon Tales on PBS?
Oh yeah.
Oh God.
I was too old for that one too.
My mom was not a huge fan of that show. She wasn't a fan of anything that had main characters with bat wings. Gargoyles was also, banned. Yeah, too demonic. But Dragon Tales trying to convert all those kids to witchcraft. Better stick with Wishbone. No, but back to your list. So. Yeah, Sleepy Hollow. It's funny. So I remember that one being the Halloween episode. Mm-hmm. I don't really remember a whole lot about what the plot. I mean, obviously, I know what the plot of Sleepy Hollow was. Yeah. But I don't even remember all that much about that. I just remember that Joe dresses up as like a camouflage, like soldier or something. Like he gets like the gray and black camo. Yeah. And when I was a kid, I was like, oh, man, I want that costume because I love soldier costumes. That was the only thing I remember about that episode. And the kids were slightly older.
Yeah.
In that episode.
that episode was the first episode of the second season, and
Okay.
from my research on Wishbone, they had 40 episodes in the first season, and then 10 episodes in the second season. And the second season was when the kids were a little bit older, and that episode, one of the reasons I liked it was not just because the Sleepy Hollow story was really, really creepy, and they actually, like, they imply that Ichabod Crane gets killed at the end of it by throwing the fiery filled CG, 90s CGI pumpkin head at him, and that freaked me out. But then additionally, the story with the kids was cool because Joe was basically afraid to go into this haunted house because he keeps telling people, first of all, he keeps thinking he has bad luck all the time, and then secondly, he as a kid he saw like these eyes peering at him, and then at the end of the episode you find out, oh, it was just a cat, and he saw the eyes of the cat reflecting the light off of the moon onto him, and he thought
it was Sagwa coming for the Wishbone spot.
It was Sagwa coming for his time slot. It's true. Now Donovan has determined this is the true war between the shows.
Yes. It was dogs and cats from the very beginning. I mean,
it's true.
Come on, you can't let those Chinese cats in. They're gonna spread viruses and kill your dogs. That's probably very, very topical, very, very, very on point. Anyways, okay, so we talked about Sleepy Hollow. What was another one that on your list that was a difference between our two? Because Tale of Two Cities and
I missed one. I think I may have included 6 on my original list. But one of the ones that I had mentioned was the Joan of Arc episode.
Oh, and yeah, that was good.
I love that one because they actually show her getting burned at the stake. So, I mean, again, it was a pretty intense show.
And she got shot. I remember watching the special effects reel after that they played after. That was the other thing, is that they showed you how. I mean, that was probably one of the things that actually got me interested in filmmaking from the beginning, was they showed you how they did the filmmaking. And one of the special effects reels was the arrow that shoots into her. Yeah. Like they had on like a wire, and it was like a foil arrow, and it was interesting.
Yeah. I love those little, I don't know what you would call them, blurbs at the end or whatever, where they'd show, and the different episodes where like they would show you, okay, we have actually 5 different dogs that play Wishbone, and one of them does his swimming stunt, and one of them does his like jumping stunt, and one of them we throw out of buildings, and we don't have that
dog. that one we can't show you because we threw him out of a building.
He didn't survive that take.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
We threw a flaming pumpkin at his head.
The other one, I don't think that I read. I don't think I read this in my original list, but the Frankenstein episode, I think, is the most freaking scary Wishbone episode of all time. I'm still scared of that episode as an adult.
I think I was vaguely scared of the Frankenstein episode, but I was more like interested in the fact that it wasn't your typical Frankenstein. That was what introduced me to the fact that the book was very different from the Hollywood portrayal of Frankenstein. But Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was sort of that way. That's on my secondary list. Yeah. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, he kills himself at the end of the episode, like Hyde or Dr. Jekyll does. And you see it too, like he drinks the poison. I think it's implied that he's like in transformation. So it makes it much more of a noble thing. But that I remember being like very dramatic and very scary because Hyde was like killing people and stuff. So Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and Sleepy Hollow were all those that had like very like kind of deep scary themes. Yeah.
So I kind of want to did we cover all the ones on your initial list, or?
I mean, I would just say, like I said, Hound of the Baskervilles had a lot of like, that was like a good example. I mean, coming from a filmmaking perspective, a really good example of like using off-camera space to make, because they had those moments where like the hound was like coming up to people and you would hear it in the distance, and it was all the Scottish moor.
Yeah.
But obviously they were shooting on a studio somewhere, but they just did such a fantastic job of making it scary. Tale of Two Cities, I just want to throw out that soliloquy by Sidney Carton is definitely one of the best that's been done, and it's done in his cell. It's not like done on the way up to the guillotine, but they do have a guillotine in the courtyard, and they're chopping like lettuce with it.
Yeah.
Which sounds a lot funnier than it really was, but it does, like, you're like, oh boy, that's supposed to be a human head, like, and then they like take an aristocrat from, like, they throw an aristocrat through a window or something. That was like, I just remember, just very dramatic, very, very dynamic stuff happening in that episode. But those are basically the ones.
I think that the Tale of Two City ones is the one probably that I sought out the most as a kid, because that ending scene, it is, I really think you need to watch. I know you had, or when last we spoke, you hadn't watched the 1980s version.
Yes, the 80s one,
of Tale of Two Cities. I think Wishbone lifted a lot of set ideas from that version. So I would be really interested to see what your thoughts were on how they, what the similarities and differences are between the 1980s version and the Wishbone version, because it was like embarrassingly obvious when I watched that 1980s version. I was like, this is like the Wishbone episode. This is completely the Wishbone episode. So you'll have to check that out.
Wishbone, that hack. Just going into 1980s movies and just taking all his ideas. Yeah, I take back everything I said at the beginning of this.
Exactly. There you go. But
that's basically it.
Okay, so I wanted to move on to the secondary list because there's just so many. I have a secondary and a tertiary list. But before we get to those lists, I did want to mention, because you mentioned the Treasure Island episode.
Yes.
And I liked that episode more because of the story with the kids than of the Treasure Island story. I love that the barn burns down and they're trapped inside, and there's like the horseshoe and they can't get out and everything. And, like, I love that. I was that and the Tale of Two Cities ones I thought were really good, but because I didn't like the Treasure Island story, I didn't want to include it on my top. That
was actually, to your point, that was why I remembered the episode. I was trying to remember which story it went with. I was like, wait, which one was the one where she is looking for Blackbeard's horseshoe or whatever? And but I will say, in the Treasure Island episode, Ben Gunn is kind of freaky, and he kind of freaked me out a little bit. But I always enjoyed that whole thing to begin with. I don't really remember Long John Silver, which does say something about the Treasure Island episode maybe not living up to what the story actually was. But you're right, the kid's story was great. Yeah,
that was that one should have made my top list, but again, the Treasure Island story I didn't think was one of the better iterations of the Wishbone story. But my secondary list, I'll just rattle them off. I loved the rendition of 1001 Nights, the Time Machine episode, Scandal in Bohemia, the Purloined Letter, and the Phantom of the Opera episode. So what was that, 4 or 5? I don't know. I can't count either.
So here's what I'll say. I don't remember the Arabian Nights episode. My sisters all agreed that was one of the better episodes, but I don't remember it. I think I remember that's the one where, like, David has, like, cyber hackers or something.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know if it's possible I never actually saw that one, because I don't remember the kids' story, and I don't remember the actual Wishbone episode that accompanied it. But that's one that my sisters really liked. Fan of the Opera was also on their list as well.
I want to mention, though, just real quick, because it's interesting your sisters like that episode. I think the reason is because the Arabian Nights story, like, set that aside. The way it starts is there's this slave girl that comes into the Sultan's tent, and he says, I'm going to sentence you to death for whatever. She, like, spilled his tea or something, and you're being sentenced to death. Yeah. I mean, I would sentence somebody to death if they spilled milk on me or alcohol or whatever it happens to be.
Right.
But so but she comes in and she's supposed to be sentenced to death, and she's supposed to be, have her head cut off. And she says, wait, before you sentence me to death, I need to tell you a story. And so she tells him this elaborate story of the, I think it's the Alibaba and the 40 Thieves story. When there's the cave and he's like, open sesame, and and he gets trapped in the cave, and or his friend gets trapped in the cave, or however it goes. But that story aside, she ends up, because she tells such a compelling story, he ends up putting off her sentence until he finally says, you know what, I just want you to be my storyteller for the rest of time. Let's not kill you. And so I think that may be one of the reasons why your sisters like the episode, because it was kind of a woman being a little bit conniving.
That's what we call turning a job, or that's what we call turning a death sentence into a job interview. That's great. Actually, it's funny. It's like I'm getting like little pings of remembrance on that one, but I still it doesn't hold like specific memories for me. But that is I'll have to revisit it. I'll have to look it up on the YouTubes. But okay, so you said Phantom of the Opera, and then the Purloined Letter, which is also on my second list as well. So we may as well just get that one knocked out right now. That one was really cool. Like that one was it was so, I remember, because anytime I ever lose like a tax document or something in my room, I always think of that episode, because I remember they're like pulling up the floorboards and they're like sticking needles into cushions trying to figure out where it is. And then, of course, the whole time it's, under the inspector's nose. And they've got that part where, they set the diversion. Or wait a minute. Was that in the Purloined Letter? Or Scandal in Bohemia?
Scandal in Bohemia is the diversion.
So they had the guy shooting in the pistol out in the street?
Yeah.
Oh, that's weird. I conflated the two. But it's funny because they're similar stories, because they're both looking for documents. But are you sure that in the Purloined Letter he didn't use a diversion to try to get the guy to go for the letter? Or
no, because the people who aren't supposed to get the letter never get it.
Okay, because it's not the police looking for the letter. It's like I conflate the two in my head, but
it's been a long time since we've watched these.
Why don't I remember these things? I was only 9, but anyways, I do remember the Purloined Letter being great, and it just reminds me of how great those actors were too, because it was a small cast of actors. I mean, they only had like 2 or 3 women, I want to say, and like just a couple of different age ranges of men, and they just kept recasting them, and they were fantastic. They were very good character actors.
It was amazing how those actors, even though you saw them, like the guy who played Sidney Carton also played like Brom Bones in Sleepy Hollow, and a couple other guys, and it was amazing how he just blended in with every single character he was. Right. I think he was like, was he the Sheriff of Nottingham, maybe? Also,
he might have been. Yeah.
They used that guy a lot, and he was incredibly versatile.
He looked good in a wig. That was his special talent. Okay, so then you had Phantom of the Opera, and then what was the other one?
The Time Machine.
Oh, the Time Machine was scary. The Morlocks were freaky. Like those Morlocks, I remember just being like, me no like that.
Yes.
But yeah, that was a scary one. I did consider putting that on my list, but it wasn't my favorite. Phantom of the Opera, I don't really remember. I remember a little bit of it, but I don't remember really the whole. Kind of got drowned out by the Gerard Butler version that I saw a couple years later.
That one was, I actually find it interesting that the Wishbone version of the Phantom of the Opera is actually the closer version to the book compared to a lot of these other ones, because as my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is at the end of the book, I haven't actually read the whole book, is that she actually ends up befriending him and forgiving him and all of the rest of it, and he ends up going on like allowing her to go away and marry this other guy. But in all of the other movie versions that I've seen, including like the silent movie version, which I think is the creepiest version of all time, the one with
it's
Lon
basically
Chaney.
a straight up horror movie.
Yeah, and then it's either he kills himself or he gets killed at the end. Like in every version I've seen, either he kills himself or he gets killed.
And the Phantom in that one is not sexy. Like any other time, they're all like, oh yeah, only half his face is scarred, and even then, it's like it's a badass scar. Like you could live with that kind of scar, if the other half looked like Gerard Butler. But in Lon Chaney's version, he's just like, no, this guy is the most hideous creature.
That one, the Lon Chaney version, I always laugh because apparently Lon Chaney walked out in front of the director and the director hadn't seen him in makeup yet. And since Lon Chaney did his own makeup, he was the only one in the room with himself. He painted his whole face and finished it off. And he walked out and the director jumped. He was like, what the heck? What did I create?
Who let this guy on set? Do you even work here, buddy? It is terrifying. And he would stretch his face and do all sorts of unconventional like temporary facelifts and stuff like that. It was amazing. But yeah, that's actually a good point about the Phantom of the Opera, is that it seems like both Hunchback of Notre Dame and Phantom of the Opera have a maybe more tragic, but I don't know, the endings just seem to be a little bit more meaningful in the books than in the movie versions. But I mean, I haven't done an extensive study of it, but I'd have to rewatch that. That's interesting though, that the Wishbone version was closer in adaptation.
I think it's one of the most movie and TV adaptations of these shows, they kind of have to make some tweaks and some changes just because of the media change and
absolutely.
The format change. Sometimes
Disney
edits to the story are just what you have to do. So it's just interesting that sticking closer to the book actually fit better within that media version for kids than doing and then he rips off his mask and he's dead.
Yeah, right.
So,
yeah.
Did you have any differences in your secondary list from mine?
I would say my main differences were, so Sleepy Hollow was on my secondary list. Because I remember how scary it was, or how good, I love the fall and I love Halloween time. So it was always nice to see those episodes that really went there. Yeah. I really enjoyed, like I said, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I thought was always very poignant, in the sense of man's struggle with himself and his dark side. And I understood that at a very young age in a weird way. So I remember that was always kind of a sad one for me. And then I would say Robin Hood was one that I kind of liked, with the principal who was throwing out the food bank food and stuff. It was kind of a silly, anyways, but that was a good one. That was Robin Hood was good. I always loved Robin Hood stories in general. And then one that I really actually remember liking, and that wasn't creepy, but it was sort of eerie, was Rip Van Winkle. That one I remember being very it's basically a ghost story, because it goes out in the woods and meets these mysterious men who are outdatedly dressed and stuff, and they're all drinking ale and they're bowling. It's such a weird story. I went out of the woods today. I met these guys in pilgrim outfits, and they gave me a beer and they asked if I wanted to go bowling. And then now I'm 60 years old. What gives? It was such a cool story. I thought it was the best. I mean, I think I've never read the original source material. But ever since I saw that Wishbone episode, I was sort of this is kind of the best time travel story ever. Because it's not 100% realistic. Well, it's not 100% realistic at all. But it's almost there's more of it is just a ghost story merged with a time travel story. So I thought that was kind of cool. And I liked how Wishbone had a little musket on his back. I was he's got a gun. Watch out. But yeah, so that's those were, and then I've got a couple others that keep pinging back to me, but I'll let you go into your I'll let you comment on those, and you can go into your tertiary list.
Well, the only thing about the Rip Van Winkle episode is, first of all, that was the episode my mom suggested I put on my list. I didn't like that episode as a kid because it depressed me, because I was like, he went to sleep and he woke up and now his daughter doesn't even remember him, and this is terrible, and no one knows who he is, and he's crazy. I was just like, I don't know. When I was a kid, I hated like misunderstandings of that kind. Yep. And so to see an episode like that, I was just like, oh, this pushes all the wrong buttons.
It's all an allegory for drug addiction. The moral of that story is cocaine's a hell of a drug. You go into the woods, and then you might lose some time. No, but you're right.
Find
it is
some
sad.
Guys out there.
It's a weird. It is more of like a cautionary tale. I do think that there is something like I was talking about, like with lessons that have been passed on to us through these stories. Like I think the lesson of Rip Van Winkle is like, you should really be careful of how much time you let slip away, and how much of a like once you lose your sense of self, or you lose your sense of purpose, which I think in the story he kind of has, and that's kind of why he's wandering around the woods. You lose your sense of time, and eventually you wake up kind of a different person, and things may have even forgotten you. But a really cheery story to send the kids to bed with.
So I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 4 others I just wanted to shout out, but I think before I get to that list, is it Silas Marner? Is that the episode where he like adopts the little blonde girl, and then she grows up, and then he finds out that her real father is this other guy?
I think so.
That episode was really, like, because there's the one guy that, like, he goes off wandering in the woods in the rain at night, and he falls off the cliff, and that's another episode that's like, this was a hardcore show for kids.
Like somebody, Wishbone's narration comes in. Just to be clear, kids, he's not coming back. Like, once you fall off a cliff, you're dead, and everybody around you's gonna die. No, but
it's like the moral of that story is, don't go walking around in the dark at night if it's raining, because you might fall off a cliff and you won't come home.
Yeah, maybe find a nice tree to just, sit under and hope that 40 years doesn't pass in the meantime. But
hope that you don't have any gentlemen out in the woods. They're doing their Gentleman Scofflaw podcast, and they're bowling and having. And then 20 years later, your daughter doesn't recognize you.
Meanwhile, the sound engineer is like, guys, this podcast and the bowling, they don't really go together because it's kind of loud. But yeah, no, that Silas Marner, I saw the title of that and I didn't remember which one it was. But now that you mention the story, I do remember. Yeah. And wasn't there like an accompanying plot in the kids' story where like the guy wanted to like buy Wishbone or something, or like he found Wishbone and like was taking care of him, and then Joe had to like go, and like it turns out that like it was like one of those things where he wanted to keep the dog, he was just sort of. He was a lonely old man.
Yeah, I think Wishbone gets lost in the woods or something, and he gets found by somebody, and he doesn't have his collar on, and the guy doesn't know how to place him, and so he just decides to keep him, and he's walking around in the woods again, and Wishbone actually just goes and finds Joe, and then the guy was like, "Oh, you're the owner of this dog." Oh, duh.
Yeah. Yeah, in the alternate version, Joe gets revenge on the guy stealing his dog, and turns into a whole different story. No, but yes. So Silas Marner, and then what was did you list off a couple after that, or you? Okay.
That one just came to mind because I had a similar experience to you, whereas I saw the name of that episode and I was like, I do not remember that story at all.
Yeah.
And it just came to me. I was like, which episode was that? And then I thought, it was Silas Marner, you dimwit, Kelly. What's wrong with you? So
I've never heard of that book, actually, so I'll have to check it out.
I guess I've heard of it, but I've never put the story together with the title. I think I had that problem when watching the show too. I would see the title and be like, oh, that looks boring. And then I'd watch it and I'd be like, oh, I remember this one.
Right.
But the other four, my last four, were the Great Expectation episode. We talked about this on a previous episode of my show. The Black Arrow I thought was really, really cool.
What was the Black Arrow?
That one, it's like, I only remember the scene where Wishbone's stunt double jumps out of the castle, like he's trapped in the castle and he jumps out into the water and he has to swim away. And then at the end, the main character, or I think it's the main villain, gets shot by an arrow and he's laying in the grass having been shot and he says, "Is the arrow black?" And Wishbone says, "It is black." And I just remember like that sent chills up my spine. I did not know what any of it meant, but I was like, that is so scary.
Dang, I don't know if that might have been one that I missed. I'd have to see the accompanying like modern day plot to see if I remembered it, but that's interesting. Yeah,
that was a later episode. That was like a season 2
kind
of episode.
Maybe I had football practice that day.
Probably. They also, the last two of mine were the Moonstone and Northanger Abbey. I really enjoyed both of those. As a kid.
Northanger Abbey. See, that's another one where the Northanger Abbey episode got overshadowed by. I saw a Northanger Abbey TV movie with Felicity Jones. Felicity Jones? Yeah, I think that's her name. The girl from Rogue One.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't remember the Wishbone adaptation. But yeah. And then what was the Moonstone? What was the deal with the Moonstone?
The Moonstone episode is weird. But basically it's this stone that's owned by like, I can't remember if it's like this tribal group, and it gets stolen and then it gets purchased by this guy who's going to give it to his fiance, and the maid or the housemaid or whatever, she's in love with the guy who owns the house, and she doesn't want him and his fiance to get together. So she's like super jealous that he's given her this Moonstone, which is like this most precious gem and whatever. And I'm like losing the finer points of the story. But basically, Wishbone plays the owner of the house, and he's like sleepwalking through the house and stealing the Moonstone back for himself.
Okay. Yeah, I vaguely remember it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess the maid like ends up like running away and refuses to work for them again or something like that. But I thought that episode was kind of weird and creepy, and so I enjoyed it because these are the things that make me happy, I guess.
No, I mean there is like, I mean it was exciting. I mean it was like exciting entertainment. It was like stuff that sort of piqued the interest and kind of scared you a little, but not too much. It was perfect after school entertainment for sure. I remember just the David and Goliath episode. Well, wait, was it David and Goliath? Which was the one where David breaks his dad's car mirror?
That's the one. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So David and Goliath, I remember seeing that a bunch, and I could kind of relate to that episode because I used to like break things of my dad's, or like, you know, I would like do something and I'd be like, oh shoot, how am I going to cover this up? And and that one, like he like glues it back on, and then the dad gets like really angry at the guy who sold him the car, and eventually like David has to come clean. That was a really good kind of in the real world plot. That was a great one. So and then there was, I guess I just want to talk about like now just shifting gears to like characters. So I totally forgot about Wanda.
Yes,
the pink flamingo lady. She was really funny, and like I totally forgot it, like, and how eccentric she was. Like you didn't really realize it as a kid how eccentric she was. Yeah. But like she was weirdo. But yeah. So that, and then there was DeMont, the bully, who I also totally forgot about. But he was like the biggest jerk. Yeah. Yeah.
I love like Wanda. My mom brought up Wanda. She's on any episode with Wanda. Because she was the comic relief and also kind of somewhat of an antagonist for Wishbone, because she was that neighbor, like, get your dog off my lawn kind of neighbor. Also, she, you know, every time she would introduce herself, she'd be, I'm Wanda Gilmore from the
Yeah.
Oakdale Arbor
Yeah,
Day
Wanda
Society.
Gilmore. To be fair, she may have had a point in keeping Wishbone away, because
Yeah.
somebody told me recently Jack Russell Terriers are basically homicidal dogs. Like, despite Wishbone being very, very cute, like
Yeah.
they will kill anything and everything that's like their size and under. So you have to really be careful. Like they're killing machines. But they also dig up power lines, apparently. Like,
Oh
they're
my
diggers.
gosh.
Yeah, they dig and like a lot of times these Jack Russell Terriers will get electrocuted because they dig up power lines. So maybe Wanda had a point. Speaking of Wanda, so there was a great episode. I think it was, I want to say Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but I'm not entirely sure. But the one where she falls in love with the Elvis impersonator at the pizza parlor, and it turns out that it's like the teacher or something.
Yeah.
And
it's
like
Mr. Pruitt.
Yeah, Mr. Pruitt. Oh my gosh, that was always like so cringy as a kid. I was just like, oh, Mr. Pruitt, what are you doing with your life? But then, I mean, it was so like, it was funny thinking back on it. Like, that was like such a great, because I think his wig falls into the pizza.
Yeah, well,
like his Elvis wig or something falls into the pizza.
That's one of the most classic episodes. And what happens is she's actually dating the teacher. But then he's not available to go out with her when she wants, and so she starts like getting all pissy, and so she ends up going out and meeting this Elvis impersonator, who is actually her date, but he's been doing this at the pizza parlor, and that's why he can't go out with her. But she doesn't recognize him, and then he's like really getting into his impersonation, and his wig flies off, and she finds out that it's him. Yeah, that's
that was great. That was great. I love that episode. All the pizza parlor stuff was always fun. Like, I don't know, the pizza parlor was like kind of a mainstay of the whole thing.
Yeah. I want to move to Oakdale, Texas, and so we can revisit all the old spots. Unfortunately,
it's a fictional place, but you just, keep dreaming.
Just let me live in my fantasy, Donovan. Yeah. Let me live. Like, we're all, everybody's still stuck in quarantine at the time when we're recording this episode. So we're all just reliving our childhoods. Through streaming services. I
want to meet the people out there who are such big Wishbone fans that they're like cosplaying and like turning towns into Oakville. Is it Oakville or Oakdale?
I think it's Oakdale.
Oakdale. Yeah. Like they like actually do that. I actually remember one of my sister's friends in college actually saw Sam, the girl, at a baseball game or something. And
that's hilarious.
She apparently yelled out at her and was like, Sam. And Sam turned her head and smiled at her and then walked away. And I was just like, oh my gosh, that is like, it's like a big deal, but when you actually think about it, you're like, it's on the scale of celebrity sightings, it's so small, but it's like for people from Kansas, it's kind of a big deal. Oh yeah, I saw Sam from Wishbone. So
I mean, if I'm having to pick, I would rather meet Sam from Wishbone in real life than Gordon Ramsay or somebody that I can't really relate to. But I adored Sam from Wishbone. Yeah. I would love to. I want to be her friend. I'd take her to coffee.
As far as I know, all the Wishbone kids, none of them turned out to be like murderers or terrible adults. But
although I do
tabs on them.
I think Joe became a Democrat, so there's that. But
Joe, what the hell? See, that's what happens when you grow up in a fatherless household, like he did.
It's also what happens when your dog dies.
That too.
It's tough. It was a hard thing to go through.
Mitt Romney killed his dog. I remember that story.
Yeah. He strapped his dog to the top of his car.
Yeah. You remember that? Yeah. You remember that episode where Mitt Romney straps Wishbone to the top of the station wagon? Drive us through Oakdale.
It's gonna get taken so far out of context. Somehow we get from Wishbone to Mitt Romney.
But honestly, that's the kind of thing that I could totally see as being like a Wishbone like plot device.
Yes.
Is like, some guy who looks like Mitt Romney, who's like a school principal, like straps a dog. And it becomes an allegory or it becomes like the accompanying thing to, I don't know, one of the Jane Austen stories, Sense and Sensibility.
There you go. They never did that one. So, this is just to kind of wrap this episode up. I think this is the reason why we're talking about this show is I wish that kids shows nowadays took the time and effort to do such quality work. Even, again, it is just a kids show, but I think people are like, oh, it's a kids show. That means we don't have to put any effort into it.
Yeah.
No, I think you should put in twice the effort to it because kids are going to watch this and they're going to, remember this into their adulthood. Look at us. We're, late 20s, early 30s. We're still talking about the shows we watched as kids and the impact that they had on us. And so I just think that people need to take kids shows more seriously and not just turn them, they're not just mindless garbage, turn them into an educational experience that's also really entertaining.
Well, it really did, the legacy of Wishbone does carry, even in my opinion, more so than most Disney movies, because, I mean, don't get me wrong, I really like the late 80s and early 90s era, or early to mid 90s era of Disney. But you like I was talking about earlier, it's like Wishbone, it did just open up your imagination and your mind to stories that were pretty, they had real elements to them. I mean, regardless of whether they took place in a fantastical land or if they were ancient or whatever, it's like you could understand what the universal truths of that story were. And if you were interested, like I was with Treasure Island and Tale of Two Cities and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and all these stories, you could pursue, the stories themselves and see what else, what rich aspects weren't included. So, I mean, I think there is a place for that even in Disney movies, but there was something so much deeper about the Wishbone episodes, which is such a funny thing to say because they were PBS, after school specials made in Texas, but they really did have a drama and a, gravitas to it that really carried and makes me reflect back on them fondly.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, people can find you, Donovan, over on Jordan Crowder's YouTube channel.
Yes, Gentleman Scofflaw podcast. Yeah. We actually just recorded one this last week, and I think it may even be out. Jordan's the one who takes care of the release schedule these days. But we talked to a male fashion vlogger, which is much more masculine than it sounds. But we did an interview with him, and it was actually one of our best interviews that we've had in a long time. Not to say that the interviews that we've done prior to that weren't good, but we really enjoyed ourselves, and we'd love to invite you to come along. So yeah, we're at Gentleman Scofflaw Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and go ahead and look us up on Spotify and all the other podcasting apps. We're on most of them. So yeah.
Sounds good. I'll link all of that below in the description. And if that episode is out, I'll also include that in the description because I'm just
Excellent.
So nice. So for those of you guys who continue to support this channel, I really appreciate it. Thank you guys for turning into my live streams and all the other videos I've been putting out. You guys have been really great. If you enjoyed this episode, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell because you just that's just the thing you do. That's what the YouTubers say. Ding. So I'm saying it over here. And I will talk to you guys on the next episode.
Thanks for having me, Kelly.